So welcome to a really quick overview for Unit 5 Biochemistry. You'll need the Unit 5 student notes, which you're going to find right at the bottom of Unit 5 in Schoology. So go ahead and get those and put them into Cami before you get going. All right, so we started this with just a review of the difference between inorganic and organic. So if you remember from earlier this year when we talked about the difference, we said that inorganic compounds, they can have carbon, they can have hydrogen, or they might have neither. But they can't have both carbon and hydrogen. So these are things that are made by nature and can be found in living things. So we're talking about examples like water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, minerals like salts and calcium. So things that our body needs but are not going to contain carbon and hydrogen. So that means organic compounds contain carbon and hydrogen. And there are some exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, things that have carbon and hydrogen are considered organic. And so they are compounds of life that are made by living things. So not that they can just be found in our environment and we use them, but we can actually make these. The four key macromolecules or organic compounds that we're going to talk about are carbohydrates, which are types of sugars, lipids, whoops, I put them in the wrong order, proteins, lipids, which are fats, and nucleic acids, which we will talk a lot more about when we get to genetics. That's DNA and RNA that you get from mom and dad. Okay, organic compounds are complex molecules that are made from smaller molecules. And remember, the only way we can make organic compounds is to get the components, those smaller molecules, in our food. So I'd like you to take just a minute, pause the video, and go ahead and try and see if you can highlight in your packet which ones of these molecules are considered organic. Remember, you're looking for things that are made by the body that contain carbon and hydrogen. So go ahead, pause the video. All right, so check your answers. You should have had in the first column proteins, CH3OH, carbohydrates. In the second column, C6H12O6, which is glucose, lipids or fats, H2CO3, C2H5O6, and the bottom one, CH3COOH. In the last column, C18H36O2, C3H6, and C8H18. So if you had those, good job. If not, check your answers. Okay, we then went on to talk specifically about carbohydrates first. Since we've already discussed glucose when dealing with cellular respiration, we know that carbohydrates are important to living things because of energy. We get energy as we break the bonds that are found inside a glucose molecule. So we may take in large types of carbohydrates like starch and break them down into those simple sugars like glucose. So just as quick review, this is going to be used during cellular respiration, to produce what our body runs on, which is ATP. And this occurs in the mitochondria of the cell. So we've already talked about this when we talked about energy production in our bodies. So the building blocks of carbohydrates are called simple sugars. They have a fancy name of monosaccharides. If you break that down, mono means one, saccharide means sugar. And just like glucose and fructose and galactose, they all end in OSE. So some examples of carbohydrates are going to be glucose, starch, which is a big carbohydrate, and so on. And when we look at carbohydrates, our carbon to hydrogen to oxygen ratio is usually in a 1:2:1 ratio. So if you look at like glucose, which is C6H12O6, and you break that down, it's 1:2:1. So when you're looking at monosaccharides are those simple sugars. The examples we gave were glucose and fructose, which is the monosaccharide we find in fruit. Galactose is another example, which is found in milk, and they provide energy. So go ahead and find a picture of glucose to put into the box to the right. Now, when we put disaccharides in here, those are going to be two monosaccharides that are together. So it's made of double sugars. And you can see that in my picture off to the right. So an example of that is table sugar, which is called sucrose. Notice that ose ending, so table sugar. So table sugar is glucose and fructose bound together. So find a picture of sucrose to put in the green box to the right. Then we're left with polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are going to be long chains of simple sugars or monosaccharides bound together. Starch is an example. It's how plants are going to store energy. And then in humans and other animals, we store energy as glycogen. So that's going to be storage in animals. Now we don't have a lot of room to the right, but go ahead and just find a very small, simple polysaccharide. Now sources for these are going to be things like bread and pasta, grains, fruits, vegetables, and of course candy. All right, move on now to lipids if you missed that section. Part 3. Lipids, in 2 easy words, is energy storage. Unlike carbohydrates, which are quick energy, this is going to be energy storage. And that's because it's very concentrated. There's about twice as much energy in lipids as there are in carbohydrates. And they're stored in the bonds. Remember, we talked about that before. When we break those bonds apart, we get energy. So think of like whale blubber. That's going to be helpful for cushioning or protection of the body and for insulation to keep them warm. So the building blocks of lipids are made from 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. And they always look like a big letter E. So go ahead and find that in your Google. We've got 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So find yourself a good picture of a lipid that looks like this letter E. Okay, there we go. Some examples of lipids in the body. Well, remember they make up the phospholipid bilayer of cell membranes. We also have some hormones in our body that are made up of lipids, like testosterone, and estrogen, and insulin, and cholesterol. Sources of lipids are going to be from meat, because it's marbled through, cheese or other dairy products, chocolate, butter, fatty fish like salmon, and nuts and seeds. All right, our last one that we're going to talk about in this section is in part 4, proteins. And we use proteins in our body for structure. Remember, you're a big blob of protein with a smile. So you are made up of lots of protein. And so they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like carbs and lipids, but they also have nitrogen. So they're easy to see when you look at their formulas, because they have an N in there, so chan instead of just cho. They're responsible for growth and repair. Now, the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. And there's about 20 different amino acids. So when those amino acids come together, which form this amino acid chain, they're going to form proteins that are going to then fold and twist into a 3D shape. So for this picture to the right, it'd probably be good if you went in and looked for hemoglobin, which is a protein found in blood, to illustrate how they twist and fold. So why do they do that? That's because the order of those amino acids, so the order that they bond together, determines the shape of that protein and the function of that protein. So that's really important. I want you to realize that the protein function is determined by the protein shape. I don't know why my arrows always get cut off on these, so there should be arrows between these, or you could just do one straight arrow underneath it to realize that the DNA from mom and dad that you got determine what amino acids are put together, which then determines what proteins are made. Okay, so hormones in the body are types of proteins that serve as chemical messengers. So they tell other parts of the body what to do. We also have enzymes that are proteins, and they're going to help to speed up reactions. In the cell membrane, we have receptors and transport proteins that help with cell membrane function, and antibodies, which are going to help fight off infections. They're going to help figure out pathogens in the body and get rid of them, so things that can make you sick. Sources for protein, so meat and fish, cheese, eggs, beans, bread, and nuts and seeds. All right, so there you have it, carbs, lipids, and proteins. Go back to any part of this video that you need and make sure that your notes are complete. Okay, I hope this has been helpful.